Hello.
There we go.
So nice to be here in Chicago at this convention. It's such a pleasure to meet and talk and hear your appreciation. Because especially when you work a lot in movies, you never sort of have contact with the audience. So when I do live theatre shows, it's immediate and it's there like this and very gratifying. So the fact that you come out and show your support is very much appreciated by me.
We're delighted that you're here.
Yes. Thank you for coming to play with us because it's a thrill. It is. Right. That's what we always say. Come to play with us.
I'm here to play.
Yes, you are. So obviously we know you as the Warlock, of course, and as Shelley in Gothic. Yes.
Yes, indeed. And this year is the 200th anniversary of Shelley's death, and I'm doing a series of readings of Shelley's poetry, but not locally, in England and in Rome next month.
Very nice.
Otherwise, I'd say, come by. Because his poetry is really rather good. And at the time I worked on Gothic with Ken Russell, Ken had very, very particular ideas about what he wanted. He was an extraordinary man, an explosive man, a difficult man, but an inspired man. I loved all his movies and really enjoyed, working with him on Gothic. But I didn't really delve into Shelley's. I read his biography and I read the poems, but I didn't read them with great depth. And as a more mature person, I come to read his work very thoroughly. And it's extraordinary that a man in his 20s could be so contemporary. The vigor, the passion, the political motivation, the philosophical insight, and the sensuality of his work is, to me, a revelation. So I encourage you to get out your dusty old copies of Shelley.
Also, you have done a lot of readings of Harold Pinter as well.
It's true, and in Chicago at Steppenwolf, I played the Harold Pinter. It was called a celebration of Harold Pinter, which came about because Harold had asked me when he had esophageal cancer, and he had committed to doing a reading of his personal writing. And he couldn't do it, but he wanted it to happen, and he wanted me to do it, conditional spending time with him, being tutored in every aspect of the work. And it was a masterclass which informed every bit of performance acting I've done since. And shortly after he died from cancer, I repeated our reading as a tribute, and people kept asking me to do it again. So with my friend John Malkovich, we worked it into a legitimate theatre piece, which we took to the Edinburgh Festival, and then we toured America, played off-Broadway twice, and all over the world. But I sort of retired that now. It was, Harold was an intense man to live with. It was like having this bird of prey on my shoulder for 6 years or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it's been a while.
Right. And what elements really draw you into a script or a story or a role?
Well, when I read a script, you almost know within a few pages of if it's something that's turning you on. And I look for the story, I look for the character, I look for then who's directing, who else is in the ensemble, if it is an ensemble. And I look for the production circumstances, where it's being filmed, and budget is never a consideration. I've had some of my most fulfilling and rewarding experiences on tiny budgets where I haven't really been paid, but have had a tremendous and meaningful experience. And also, as an actor, you choose from what you're offered, what's real. You don't just sort of magic marker your, ideal list of things you'd like to do and how much you'd like to be paid and where you'd like to shoot. No, people have to come to me and ask me. And actors are mostly reactors, both in their work and in their lives. So if somebody comes to me with a script, it already makes me interested. The fact that they want me to do it, I think, oh, well, maybe they see something, and you react to their enthusiasm. I don't do everything I'm offered, of course, but I'm predisposed to be sympathetic and open. And I love working with first-time directors or young directors. Of course, you could have a wish list of very famous directors who we all know, some of whom I've worked with. But for instance, I did a film in Rome this year. It was sent to me last year and was supposed to be shot last year, but production didn't happen until January and February. It's called Body Odyssey, and it's a sort of Frankenstein story about a man seeking to create the ideal woman in the world of female bodybuilding. And there was something so strange and haunting about this script, and yet I'd never heard of the writer, who was also directing, because she was a student. She just graduated. So I spoke to her and said, look, I really like this, but do you have anything you could show me that you've done? And she sent me a couple of her student films, and I thought, yeah, she has a very, very intuitive eye and a sense of her original cinema, and this is going to be very interesting. And my agents were not impressed because it was a small thing, but I was, and I said I would do it. And it's a film which is really about sadness, addiction, dysmorphia, schizophrenia. But it is, a lot of people with these overdeveloped muscles, and for me, Julian, I find that kind of steroid body in male or female very unattractive. But to come to a point where I was comfortable loving this body, touching it, massaging it, having showers with it, having jacuzzis with the wonderful Swiss bodybuilder who played the subject. It was very emancipating. You try to lose yourself and your own sort of inhibitions and prejudices in work. And so that was just one film I did in that. I had a very fortunate lockdown period. The last couple of years I worked on films in Hong Kong, in Africa, all over Europe, in America. And I would spend a lot of time on empty planes. And 3 weeks in a hotel in Hong Kong, in a room where the windows didn't open, you weren't allowed to go in the corridor. I had a monitor to show that I was in the room. 3 weeks. It was a very interesting period before I could come out and then do the movie with Mike Figgis.
Yeah. Another role of yours I really, really loved was the Phantom.
Il Fantasma dell'Opera.
Yes, and Dario Argento's version of Phantom of the Opera, of course. And how was that? How was working with Argento?
Well, Argento was the very opposite of Ken Russell. He wasn't volcanic. He was like a priest. He was incredibly quiet, focused, his attention to the imagery he was creating was so still and piercing. And he was trying to make a film which was faithful to Gaston Leroux's novel, and we shot in Budapest in an opera house which was designed by Garnier, the person who designed the Paris Opera House, where the novel is set. So, and you know, I had a very good time. In that film, there was a scene where I was covered in rats. Now, people ask me about arachnophobia. What was it like having spiders? No problem. I have no issue with spiders, but I do with rats. They make me shiver, like the character Winston Smith in 1984. And Dario said, Julian, there's a scene I want the Phantom with his rats. They are his friends, and I want to put many rats on you. I said, how many? I don't know, as many as I can get. And I don't know, there were about 100 rats that were in bed with me. Sort of. And you just put your mind into a Zen place and make peace with the rats. But, you know...
Your co-stars in that moment, you're friends now. It has to happen.
Say again?
That they are your co-stars in that moment, and they are your friends, and it has to happen.
Exactly, quite so, quite so. Yes. And so you're back to your question about what do you look for in a movie. I mean, I went to drama school. I came out of drama school age 21 and sort of worked in tiny theatres in London, in pubs and schools, and and then I started working with some student filmmakers who needed actors, and I thought this is a revelation, because we weren't really taught anything about acting on film or being on film, and I figured the only way I'm going to get to work on film and become comfortable and competent is by not choosing to go and do 3 years at the theatre company, although that was my ambition. And I thought, no, I just had an instinct, a desire, and desire is good if you're going to be an actor or any kind of artist. You have to have that desire. Desire is more important than talent, because everybody has a little talent which can be developed. But you have to really want it, and that's what I tell students. And slowly, little film parts came to me, and then I played a journalist in a film called The Killing Fields, and that was a big sort of international movie, and which became a sort of hallmark of credibility. The hardest job to get is your first job. Because once people have something they can refer to, so it's not them taking the risk. Everything gets much easier. And I did a film called Room with a View, which was, and still in some places, is a very, very popular film internationally. And then I'm always more interested in interesting independent films. I've been offered a lot. I was at that time offered a lot of studio work, which just seemed to me a little bit production line. I didn't have a Hollywood dream. I rather wish I had. And I turned a lot of things down. But when I was filming in Poland at the time, communism was still prevalent. Jaruzelski had just crushed Solidarność, the union movement, and I was sent this script of Warlock, shooting in Los Angeles, and I thought, oh, and we were in the winter in Poland with very challenging conditions. And I just thought, gosh, that's so exotic. And the Warlock character is like a Shakespearean villain. It's like playing Richard III. Yeah. And I relished it. Now I was told Sean Connery was attached to play Redfern, the witch hunter. That didn't work out, and I don't think it was ever really on. But I was happy to commit and loved doing Warlock. And of course, for horror fans, particularly genre fans, it's something which will be better known than Room with a View of the Killing Fields from that decade. And I love in the couple of the films I've done recently. One is called Ghosts of Monday, which is a sort of ghost hunters in a hotel in Cyprus trying to prove that ghosts don't exist, but my dears, they do. And Ghosts of Monday, I think they're trying to get it out for Halloween, but also a film I shot in Budapest with an interesting Icelandic director called The Piper. And that's an update of the Pied Piper story. And I'm the conductor of an orchestra, and the Piper's music it takes us over and sends us crazy. And I think that's wonderful and baroque. And when people who are coming to this convention, I think will enjoy the Piper. So when I grew up, I loved Hammer horror films.
Sure.
Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. As a child, I was thrilled by these. So I don't know. I've probably done about 150 movies, and maybe a dozen are absolute sort of genre films, vampires or warlocks or ghosty things. But some people will only know me as a genre actor, and that's okay. I'm happy that anyone knows me for anything. But there's another demographic which wouldn't see those films and just knows you as a romantic actor back in the day. But it's a wonderful thing to be an actor at my age, after 40 years of being an actor, to continue being asked to play, as to use your phrase. It never ceases to be thrilling. And my curiosity about work, characters, places, people, is, as if anything, more developed now than it was when I started acting. Because when you start being an actor, there's so much baggage you have to confront, anxiety and nervousness and jealousy and disappointment and rejection, and they can be very distracting. When you become a little bit established and you're on someone's list somewhere, you can be so relaxed and everything else just falls away, and you're only focused on the work you're doing. And that's at a time when most people in civilian jobs are retiring. Your work becomes so open and unpredictable and interesting.
What in particular about the horror genre do you think is exciting, interesting as an actor? Like, what does horror kind of allow you to do?
Well, there is great, you're not restricted by the banalities of everyday life. There is color and drama and passion and excitement in the dark. It's very it's a very wonderful thing to sort of do that dance, do that tango with the devil, as it were, or with the dark side. Yeah, I think when I used to read as a child, I still read a lot. As a child,
Stop that.
I used to read ghost stories, Lord Halifax ghost book, Algernon Blackwood's The Supernatural and the Uncanny, M.R. James, The Monkey's Paw, things like that.
Yeah.
And it was just, titillating. And of course, we were all, as kids, well into Ouija boards, and we would go into churchyards at night, you know, hoping to see a ghost, holding hands in a seance. And so the reason is, yeah, I think it just elevated the predictable normality of everyday life and took us into this realm of the fantastic and the phantasmagorical in a way which still excites me. When I just did a film with Glenn Danzig. Do you know Glenn Danzig?
Sure, yes, we do. Yeah.
Misfits, and he called me and said, "Hey Julian, I got this great idea for a movie because I've always wanted to do a spaghetti western, and I've always wanted to do a vampire movie, and I want you to be in the center of it, and guess what? I'm gonna make everyone a vampire. Everyone in the movie's a vampire, and you're the king vampire. And we're going to shoot it in my next door neighbor's garage because it's big and I can make a studio." And it was so, there was something so fresh and naive but enthusiastic about his call. I was persuaded. I thought, well, this is going to be different. Trust me, it was. Not the first time I played. But you know, that's vampires are all different.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'm talking to people at the moment about maybe doing a vampire film in Scotland in the fall. Again, it'll be different. Vampires are people. People are different. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have a podcast, most of you know, The Dolls of Horror. We put out the call to the listeners that couldn't be here if they had any questions for you.
Sure.
The best question that we got came from Dawn. She loves you, by the way, and she said she wants me to ask you, is it difficult being so sexy?
Are you sure that question was intended for me?
Absolutely. I second that. Yes.
Well, I think the answer would be I wouldn't know. But I'm happy to live the life and do the work. I do.
There you go. Any audience questions? Yes, sir.
How did the role of Jor-El on Smallville come to you, and what was that like for you?
Well, you know, very often there's no great mystery with casting. In those days, I got a call from my agent saying the people of Smallville would like you to play Jor-El. Nobody's ever played him since Marlon Brando, although Terrence Stamp did the voice in earlier episodes. And I said, wow, that sounds cool. Yeah, just say yes, when? And we shot in Vancouver. So it wasn't like I bumped into somebody at a party and they had an epiphany. It was a normal process. Now, casting can be like that. Somebody might not have the idea for me for a part. But then you meet them tangentially and they think, oh yeah, and generally people have ideas of who they want, and in most movies, the person who plays the main role isn't necessarily the first choice, you know, because people, if they're in demand, they're not available, or they're too expensive, or they don't want to do the part. So, you know, I don't know if I was the first person approached, but I was clearly on the list, and when I was asked, I just said yes, and I loved working. It was like stepping into this world of, Tom was fantastic. So, I don't know if he's ever been here, but it was so easy and charming, and I think he'd been doing it for about 10 years at the time I worked with him, and we had a very good rapport. So I enjoyed it. It was a very positive experience. And when they asked me back for a finale in the following season, on Krypton. I was happy to go.
Any other audience questions?
Yeah, a local theater had a retrospective of Lynch films, and they showed Boxing Helena, which had a famous trouble production. I just wonder if you had any comments about that.
Well, it did. It was a trouble production, but before I was involved, it had issues with different casts saying they were going to play it and then just feeling they didn't want to play it. I think Madonna was attached at one point to play Helena, and then famously Kim Basinger was going to play, but then her agent put her off. I think Ed Harris was going to play my role. Jimmy Spader, I think, was offered it. But then Sherilyn said she wanted to do it, and they approached me, and I met Jennifer and liked her very much. And again, it was her first film, and it didn't matter to me that she was David Lynch's daughter. I just felt what she had to say had great passion, and I was drawn to this dark fairy story. It was my take on it, that it was a beautiful love story. But when the film came out, it was greeted with great hostility by reviewers, and the audience too. I mean, some liked it, but it wasn't a success. But nearly 25 years later, I think it's a much more contemporary film than it was at the time it was made, and people who see it over the last 3 or 5 years have responded to it in a way that was entirely Jennifer's aim when she wrote and filmed the piece. I enjoyed it very much. Difficult because it was dark.
Any other?
Yes. I got a couple questions about the movie Warlock. Let's see, what was the first? Well, I think, did you know that there was a Warlock, or proposed Warlock comic book? I saw an interview by Ray Tate. I kind of forget who he was, but there was like 2 issues, but the Warlock character in that was not supposed to be you, or something like that. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't, but I imagine, and I don't know who this character was, but yeah, it's a good idea for a comic book thing, and maybe the character wasn't supposed to be me because of rights issues.
Yeah, it was right. It was some kind of rights issues. They didn't really want any actual characters in the movie.
That makes sense, because it was very complicated. There was talk about doing another Warlock after the third one, which I didn't want to do. They came back to me and said, look, we know we messed up the last time.
And that's another thing about the actual Warlock movie. There were a couple of sequels, but they were more like reboots. Do you agree?
Well, I didn't see. I read this. I liked the second Warlock the Armageddon. I thought that was interesting, kind of psychedelic and strange. But the script of the third, which I was sent, I thought was rehash and weak and uninteresting, when they should be looking to be more creative and spend more money and really enjoy the possibility of an enduring audience.
I think a lot of the things that Warlock fans are wondering about is, was there or are there any plans for a sequel that's more like a straight up sequel to the movie Warlock, like there finally was with the movie Leprechaun?
Not to my knowledge, but that doesn't mean to say people aren't making plans.
Why they did that? Okay, I think there was one more question I can think of offhand. Is that I remember a long time ago that guy I was with the comic, I believe his name was Ray Tate, said that there was some people who protested, and there were some censorship issues with the movie Warlock, and it was done by, I think, according to him, fundamentalist groups who, I guess they're opposed, just the name Warlock.
Yeah, I think that's true, but fundamentalist groups will protest about anything. So, most of the movies I've done have been protested by fundamentalist groups. and I'm very happy about that.
Yeah. I had a Warlock question.
Yes.
So, Warlock 1 and Warlock 2, both very different films in feel. What was it like filming those? Like, what were the differences in the filming styles and processes?
Well, the first film was much more classically made, and Steve Miner was very good at handling that. Possibly quite conservative in some way. I mean, his filmmaking was traditional, very literal, but he did a very good job. The second Warlock was directed by Anthony Hickox, who was much more like a sort of a maverick image made. He'd done a lot of video work with rock and roll bands.
He also did Hellraiser 3, which is a very like nightclubby rock and roll feel too.
That
makes sense.
So he was going for something much more kind of rock and roll, psychedelic, not showing any respect necessary to the first. That's why I wasn't wearing the same stuff. He wanted me in this sort of more what he said, rock star frock coat and pant. I still have it. So I think the director, the filmmaking is very much the director's medium. They're the people. As an actor, you're paint on the palette of the director, and of course, you apply yourself in your own particular way. But it's a director's medium because of the immense time spent in pre-production and post-production. Filmmaking, the actual filmmaking is usually the shortest period of making a movie. And I thought Tony Hickox would go on to have a much more mainstream. I thought he was original and an exciting fella to work with, great energy, but he didn't really, to me, have the career so far that I thought he would have. Yeah.
And what would you say are some of the biggest differences between performing on stage and performing in film?
Well, before I talk about the differences, which are in some way self-evident.
Right.
We're doing our little play here, and you're here, and it's wonderful and intimate and connected when you're working. But it's a mistake. People think that there isn't an audience when you make a movie. Of course there is. There's people all around the crew, and it might be a big crew, a small crew. There is the director you're playing to, the camera. I mean, there is energy, and you're responding to that. And the creative process comes from of creating a character, comes from the same place. Now, technically, you may modify projection. You will look for a different kind of nuance in a line or an expression, but it's coming from the same place. But the great thing is, if you're doing a movie, you get to do it over and over until you get it the way you want it to be. But the great thing about doing a play, you get to do it again every night, and you never really get it to where it's always different. It's never quite what you want it to be, which is what makes it very fascinating. It's like you're cooking the same meal every night, but it's always different, with different guests, of course. I suppose I made a choice in my early 20s. I described this desire to be involved in films, and I have been. I mean, I do plays, and I do these one-man presentations because it gives me great freedom. I can do them as pop-ups, whereas if you do a play, you're committing to 6 weeks rehearsal and then maybe 3 months to 6 months performance. you could make 3 movies in that time, and have these very different, enriching. So it's a lifestyle choice to a degree. I mean, I've worked in over 50 countries on movies, and as I said, I am looking forward to working in more. You know, if you're an actor, you have to have a kind of wanderlust. You know, you're a traveling player. And there's a poetry to that as a lifestyle. But then, you know, to me, my idea of hell would be to be attached to a television show which goes for 10 years, you know, because I've never been in that position. So I know they make a lot of money, those guys, but I like not knowing where I'm going to be in a month's time or 2 months' time.
You like being a wandering minstrel?
A wandering minstrel I, a thing of rags and patches, of ballads, songs, and snatches.
Love me some Mikado.
Yeah.
Gilbert and Sullivan, man.
So you know, it's an exciting thing to I mean, when I was a little boy, I wanted to be an actor. Nobody knew how that could happen in my family, you know, in the north of England, but it came true, and never more true than right here, right now, with you, and I'm immensely grateful for that. So, yeah. Any other questions from? Yes.
I'm always fascinated to know from an artist, what's inspiring you these days? Is there a book or a movie or a play, something you've experienced recently that you'd want to share with us? Anything that's inspiring your art?
Well, I get inspired by other people's ideas on my behalf. In other words, I go to Rome next week to do a much more mundane thriller compared to the body odyssey I described. But it has style, and it has panache, and Monica Bellucci I like, and I'm looking forward to doing scenes with her. And but I would never have had the idea. But I responded to their script. It's called Gold Diggers, and after that in London I do a film. I can't tell you too much about it. It's called Slippery Beast, and I play a character called Orson. But I'm not allowed to talk about it. I just have. And that, to me, was a very original, strange script. A sort of pseudo-documentary exploring a murder which took place in the 19th century. And I'm really excited for that. But I would never have come up to my agent and said, you know, I'd like to do another film in Rome, because generally I like to go somewhere different. Or I'd like to work in London on a pseudo-documentary about the murder of a 19th century Parisian artist. But then when you read it, you respond. That's what I say, actors react. But I don't have in my bag a bunch of books or scripts I'm showing to people and saying, look, I'd really like to do this. Because production, then you get involved in production, that can be grueling and go on. In between jobs, I spend a lot of time mountain climbing. I like going to the mountains. And the power is there. The still and solemn power of many sights and many sounds, and all of life and death. Anybody know who I was quoting? Shelley, Mont Blanc.
There we go. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, is there any movies, I guess, that you auditioned for that you didn't, like, that you wish you would have gotten, that became big, or?
Which certainly there are movies which I have been in the mix for, which I didn't get, which were big movies. But I don't live with regrets, you know.
Right.
Anne Rice wanted me to play Vampire Lestat,
Oh, nice.
and because I'd met her, I was filming with Mary Lambert in New Orleans, and we were filming in her house. It didn't happen, but no, all actors are considered for things, and they can only use one person. And sure, sometimes, not so much now, but back then, you used to audition, and you know, that can go either way. Most of the work I've done, I haven't had to audition for. People have just asked me to do it, and but I'm more interested in being involved in a good movie than a big movie, you know. But certainly there've been things I've kind of thought, yeah, wow, you know, I wish that had worked out. We'll see the results, but no, all that falls away when you get into your middle age, you know. And it's a normal thing that if you're a working actor, you're not going to be able to do everything you might want to do, or even do everything you're asked to do, and would like to do, because there are only 12 months in the year, and you know.
Anyone else? Oh.
I mean, I'd love to hear a favorite Warlock memory, just during the shoot, something that really sticks out to you still.
Well, what you must remember about Warlock, it was shot on film. It wasn't video, it wasn't digital.
Right.
And there was no CGI, so everything was, I think the word is analog. All the effects were analog. So when I'm flying around and there's I've got that spear, you know, it means I'm on a wire.
Weather vane.
Dangling from a crane with this weather vane strapped to a thing on my chest, and at one point the crane, the controls, which were one of the sort of started vibrating. I mean, it was you know, got very, very juddery. So I was being thrown around. They couldn't film. Hey, so Sonny, who's on the crane? It was, but I trusted the wire. I knew the wire was because I knew the wire would hold me. But I didn't trust the crane because that looked like it was about to topple over. So that was, you know, one of the more sort of death-defying memories. But what I remember most, there were very good actors in Warlock. One of the reasons it worked, because everybody played their roles with absolute authenticity and sincerity and belief. You know, even the sort of the one line, one scene company members. It was a very good ensemble, and that's what made it, I think, very appealing.
Well, I would also love to talk to you a little bit about Rose Red.
Sure.
That's a really fun little Stephen King miniseries. If no one's seen it, check it out. Yeah, we got some. Any memories from shooting Rose Red?
Well, it was what I loved about Rose Red, that it was 3 installments. If they made it just 1 or even 2, they'd have had to cut so much of the atmosphere, the romance, the feeling of just being in this house, which had a special character. And again, you know, a very interesting and diverse group of actors together in a sort of in sympathy with each other. I mean, I believed all those characters for being who they were as presented, which isn't always the case. And I love, we shot it in Seattle, in and around Seattle. And there was an amalgam of, the actual house was one particular house, but there were a couple of other houses were sort of used for certain scenes and garden scenes. It was, Ellen used to go to the mountains up there, the Cascades every weekend. It was, and meeting Stephen King because he played the pizza delivery guy.
A really fun dance scene, by the way.
Yeah.
I love me some Big Band, so I was about that too.
Yeah, no, I mean, it had, there was something wonderfully nostalgic about it. It wasn't fantastical. It was very, very human, the story. And the house took on this kind of human characteristic. It was such a character in the film. And it wasn't sort of out there, creepy, gothic. It was believable.
Yep. I mean, also it was very much, the story was very much reminiscent of Winchester House in California,
Yes.
right? So I think a lot of us know about that, and so that made us go, oh, this is very, very cool, you know?
The Winchester House was a sort of design model, but we didn't shoot at the Winchester.
No.
A lot of, quite often I'm asked, did you
Really?
shoot at the Winchester
I
House?
think that'd be kind of impossible with how it's built.
Yeah, well, we didn't, so
Yeah.
that's a quick answer.
Right, yes. Julian, thank you very
My
much.
pleasure,
Thank
really.
you.
Did we have anything else to wrap up with? No? All right, well, with that, we're going to send him back to his table.
Okay, well, very nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Very nice to play.